Bring people to order. Very, very warm welcome to St Peter's Church, if I can say that. Those of you that do not know John Dickey, he's the guy with the grey whitish hair in the middle. If ever he invites you to a musical extravaganza at this place, just wear a big coat. I think it's the coldest building this side of the border. Yeah, so, but a very warm welcome. For those, I'm looking around, lots of faces I recognise. For those that I haven't had the pleasure, my name is Tony Clark. I shan't give you a biography. I had to write a biography for the LGA a couple of weeks ago, and I started writing this long list of all the things that I used to do and no longer do. And I thought, well, I can't go on with this continuation of trying to give this long list of my past practices. So I said to people, I need to get my biography down to at least 2 or 3 words so I can just get up, announce who I am, what I think I am, and move on. And I think my wife probably came up with the least helpful suggestion. She says you can just get up and say, Tony Clark has been, which was 2 words. I took no notice, and I come up with, at the next meeting I went to, when introductions were going around, I just said, Tony Clark, left-wing irritant. And that's all I want to be. All I want to be is try to promote the values of the left, the values of the Labour and trade union movement. So therefore it was probably with, it was a great honour, can I say, for me then to be asked to chair the inaugural Ron Todd Memorial Lecture, because Ron, for those of us that had the pleasure of his company, being in his presence, will know that Ron was special, not only as a massive trade union leader, not only as a socialist, he was special as a person. He was very much old school. He was very much one of those leaders that was loved by those that he represented, because he was real, because he said it as it was, because he belonged to that tradition within the movement that didn't have to rely on soundbite, didn't have to rely on spin, didn't have to look at what the party or the trade union were telling him he should say. He just spoke from the heart. And I think as we're in the middle of conference season, and we've had the Lib Dems and Labour this week, the Tory party next week, we all get used to listening to these endless speeches where nobody actually says anything. They just trip out buzzword after buzzword, the latest fashionable trend. And you come away thinking, well, I kind of want to believe that, but I'm not quite sure what they said. And I couldn't quite get to the substance, I couldn't quite get to the heart. But I tell you now, if Ron Todd was here, he'd tell you what for. He'd give you an opinion. He wouldn't leave it to his press office. He wouldn't leave it to some vacuous graduate to put together a speech for him. He'd just stand here and tell it as it is. And that's why I'm delighted that Bianca has put together such an audacious panel. Because we have people with us on this platform who equally are known for being people who tell it as it is. Community Courtyard, which Bianca is going to talk to you about later, is a body that does, not just says. It's a body that gets on and rolls its sleeves up and gets on with the hard work of trying to help and support young people. We do all the work nobody else wants to do, and we tell it as it is. So I hope we're going to have a delightful evening. We're going to listen to our speakers, and we're very pleased to see John. Can I say, John, that I know you've been to conference all week, and I know you've fell foul of the bug, and we know you've got to get back down to London, but we're very grateful for you fighting off the coughs and the chills to be with us. Equally, in terms of Bob, Robbie and Tansy, you're very welcome. And I think all 4 of you represent very much the soul of Ron Todd, because each of the movements you're involved in and each of the work that each of you do was very much part of Ron's life, very much part of his work, very much part of what he stood for as an individual. So, without further ado, we'll move on to our first speaker. For those of you that don't know, Ron was one of the first vice presidents for CND. It was a campaign that was very dear to his heart, one that he was always willing to give his time and energy to. And we're very pleased tonight to welcome Tansy Hoskins. Tansy is CND's trade union campaign coordinator. And we thought that it would be fitting, in Ron's memory, given all of his time spent with CND and his feelings as to a world without nuclear weapons, that we asked Tansy to open up tonight's lecture and give us a campaign from modern day in terms of what's happening within the movement today. So, Tansy Hoskins.
Well, hello. It's a pleasure to be the inaugural speaker for the inaugural Ron Todd Lecture. And firstly, I'd like to just say thank you very much for inviting CND to be here, to be part of the lecture series and to be part, hopefully, of the Ron Todd House. It's an idea that CND is very much behind, and we love the idea of a peace room and spreading the anti-nuclear message to the youth of today. So I'm CND's trade union officer, and CND works extremely hard to increase CND's participation in trade union work and also to increase trade unions' involvement in CND. Because at CND we share Ron Todd's belief that a world that is peaceful and a world that is safe and a world that has no nuclear weapons is for the benefit of working people everywhere, working people across the world. So we work very hard to be in solidarity with the trade union movement. Because we can't, at CND, we just simply cannot condone Britain owning and maintaining and spending billions and billions and billions of pounds on a nuclear arsenal that is 8 times greater than that which destroyed Hiroshima and which killed over 4 million people. And I've been told a story by some friends in Unite about an argument that used to happen in the TNG with defence workers, and some defence workers would argue that it should only be defence workers that got to debate Trident, because they're the ones that work on it, they're the ones that stand to lose their job, and so nobody else should be involved in the debate. And the argument came back from the anti-nuclear sector that, fine, if the defence workers could guarantee that when those bombs dropped, they would only affect defence workers, then fine, if the defence workers could go and debate the issue, and everyone else would leave them in peace. And obviously the question of jobs, particularly in the economic climate at the moment, is very central to the work that we're doing. And it comes up time and time again. We've been doing a lot of events at the TUC, at the Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival, and we're coming into contact with workers at Barrow and workers at Rolls-Royce and Unite members, and I'm a member of Unite, and obviously we have to talk to them about the fact that closing down Trident would mean them transitioning to new jobs. But CND has long stated that it is actually to be pro-Trident that is to be anti-jobs, and that CND is not the ones calling for people to lose their jobs, because Trident is extremely cash-rich and is extremely jobs-poor. And by having Trident and by spending £100 billion on Trident, you're actually removing money from the rest of the economy. You're actually removing money from jobs, and that's part of the reason why in 2011 we saw 270,000 jobs go from the NHS. So by our calculations, if we re-spent the money that's spent on Trident, we could have many more jobs and we could have many more socially useful projects. For instance, we calculated that if we spent the money that's spent on Trident on a housing building project, you would have 62,000 jobs for every 7,000 jobs lost on Trident. So it's not really an argument. And also, releasing the money from Trident would mean that the UK could invest in the green sector, and and we're already like one of the leading countries in green technology, and this is something we could increase. And so all the people who are working on Trident, who are extremely skilled, the engineers, they would easily have new jobs, and we'd be doing something that was socially useful and not leading to Armageddon. But I'm also very glad to note that the Ron Todd House will have a focus on youth, because I went last night to a film screening in Tottenham, and it was a new film that's been produced by a youth group, and it's about the riots. It's called Riots Not Wrongs, and I very much recommend people see it. And it's about the young man Mark Duggan who was shot and who sparked the riots in 2011. And at the film screening, Mark Duggan's mother was there, and a lot of his family and friends. So you can imagine it was quite an emotional evening. And we heard from someone who's just founded the Tottenham Defence Campaign, and he was saying that his slogan was that we've got no more to give, we've got no more of our children to give to the police, to the state, we've got no more of our children to be lost to this kind of violence. And I just thought that really summed up how I'm feeling about the cuts at the moment, and the way that we've got no more to give. Like, we've got no more hospitals to give, we've got no more schools to give, we've got no more disabled benefits to give, no more EMA, like there's nothing left. But of course the one thing that we could give back is Trident. And I don't think, and CND's position, which is why we'll be marching on the 20th of October on a big demonstration, is that this is the one cut that we should be making, and that there's no justifiable reason why we're spending £100 billion on Trident whilst we're sacking over 250,000 NHS staff, whilst the train I got down here was overcrowded and there were 8 school children sitting on the floor because there were no seats. Why, we shouldn't be spending this money while we're sacking public sector workers left, right and centre. And also tying into the riots, I just don't understand how we can expect the youth of today to follow laws when the government has a huge nuclear weapons arsenal which is completely illegal. I don't understand how we can expect to be providing a moral message for these young people when we have a nuclear arsenal which is absolutely immoral, which would cause a catastrophe if it was ever used, and which cannot be used. I don't understand how we can be calling for people not to be violent in this society when we have this arsenal. And I don't understand how we can be telling people they shouldn't be looting when what was Iraq if not looting on a global scale. So I think it's incredibly important, both economically, in order to set an example for the young people today, and politically and for global humanity, that we scrap Trident immediately. And so I will leave you with the question, and I'm sure everybody has an answer for this, which is £100 billion, what would you rather spend it on? Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to those that have come before you, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say, your message to us in this fight for justice for young people, and our fight to make politics, peace and equality something that we can all treasure in our lives. So John, please.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for those very kind words, Tony. It's lovely to see you as well, I have to say. Just listening to the three, I thought brilliant speeches, by the way, and they were different to political speeches, but they were more political because of it, you know what I mean? And I was remembering the first time I ever met Bianca, actually. She was a detached social worker in Dagenham, just what we were talking on the Mark Scale estate it was, wasn't it? And we were doing these walkabouts, and we were going around at nights, and it was a very tasty estate, and there were some quite challenging issues, but she befriended all of these youngsters, right? And she turned them around, she retrieved them. To her great enduring credit. And I remember we were walking around this estate one time, she said, oh, by the way, I'm Ron Todd's granddaughter. that does not surprise me in any shape or form. You know, it was as you said, something about carrying out that sort of Todd legacy on the ground, you know, boots on the streets. You know, it's exactly that. So, that's why I felt obliged to come here, actually, because but it's very difficult being invited by members of the family to talk about their loved ones. I'll give you an example of that, actually. A couple of years ago, I was in Bow Church on the Bow Road, and it was about my greatest heroes, a man called George Lansbury, who was leader of the Labour Party between 1931 and 1935. He retrieved it when Ramsay MacDonald went into coalition and broke the Labour Party, and it was Lansbury who fell between MacDonald and Clement Attlee to be Labour leader, and he held it together, and he's always my great hero. And he's from East London, and he used to live on the same street all the time. He was embedded in the people, he was part of the people. And I got invited to make and we had this massive memorial celebration for George Lansbury last year. It was down on the Bow Road, and it was literally, there was a cast of thousands there, and there was 140 members of his family sitting right in front of me, as well as all these thousands. And I was invited to get up and make my remarks, and I got to the top, and it was a thing like this, because he was an amazing ethical socialist, Christian socialist, George Lansbury. He actually set up the Christian socialist movement, actually. He was one of their first chairs. And I get up, and then I look up, and the woman who's sitting right in front of me, just there, is Angela Lansbury from Murder, She Wrote, do you remember? Who is the granddaughter of George Lansbury. She said, and I completely shut up. I didn't know how to deal with this sort of extraordinary Hollywood figure over. And the family then scrutinised every word I said. We had this long meeting after that. And it's very difficult both to honour, respect, and try and explain the real personality. Now, Ron Todd was an extraordinary figure, so it is a great privilege to be here and talk a few words about Ron. I see Ron as one of the great towering figures out of the East London who. And it's, even though Clement Attlee wasn't from East London, he was in many respects, because his character was forged in a place called Hailbury House in Stepney, and he was a fiery leader of the ILP, the Independent Labour Party, which eventually left the Labour Party, but he was an extraordinary young socialist, which is often forgotten in the 30s, when he was leading with Lansbury, a lot of the popular rebels, and it was a really extraordinary part of our history. And Ron Todd, I see, very much in the same traditions, the ILP, radical socialist traditions of Clement Attlee, of George Lansbury, of Keir Hardie, actually, another East London figure, who was eventually an MP in Wales, but he was an MP in East Ham before he was an MP in South Wales, Tom Pandy. And there's that great long tradition, not just of MPs and Labour leaders, but of trade union figures that come out of East London. And Ron is absolutely central in that. I was thinking about it, just what Tansy was saying about CND. I remember a couple of years ago we had a vote in Parliament about getting rid of tribal, and it was so obvious that we had to get rid of it. But all the political parties disagreed that we should get rid of it. So, but from a standing start, we mustered over 100 votes against it. And I remember the night before the vote, I rang my old man, who was actually, he put a uniform on, like Ron Todd, for 27 years in the country, and he used to load nuclear weapons on ships, actually. And I asked him what he thought about it. And he brought up Ron Todd's name, actually, in our discussions. And he said, well, it's just a complete hangover from a previous Cold War. You know, you've got kids with rucksacks jumping on tubes, they're the real threat. It's not like these great big weapons of mass destruction. Get rid of it, save whatever. How much you say, £100 billion? Not an insignificant amount of money, and start investing in young people, in communities, get people a house, all this sort of self-evident stuff. And afterwards, I was with a mate of mine, because he mentioned Ron Todd, because he always had quite an eye on Ron Todd, my dad, even though from time to time he thought Labour was mad, but he was a Labour voter, Labour bloke. And he reminded me, and I dug out one of Ron's old poems. Now, I don't know, someone mentioned he was a poet, but he was a bloody good poet, actually. And he used to write some poems about the tyranny of nuclear weapons, and they made it in a very concrete, practical way. So the night before we had this vote, I remember reading a Ron Todd poem about nuclear proliferation. It was very, very moving, actually. And if I'd had a bit more time today, I'd gone back and got it and read it out. Because what he used to do is send these booklets of poems out to his mates, right, and people he met across the whole globe, because he was an extraordinary internationalist. Extraordinary internationalist. He was chair of TUC International Committee for many, many years. And he was a great mate of Nelson Mandela. He was pioneering in his fight against apartheid and what he did. And he forged a great friendship with Nelson Mandela. But what always interested me about him, he was just such an ordinary bloke. He was such an ordinary bloke. I remember, I always see him as a honest English patriot, actually, and I mean that in the best possible way. I was listening to Ed Miliband's speech at the Labour Party conference just this last week, and he was talking about one nation, patriotism, and Labour patriotism. And I see Attlee, Hardy, Lansbury, Todd, these great patriotic Labour movement figures that were trying to contest what the country could be, rather than just handing it over to those who think they're born and rolled, and usually do spend most of their time ruling over us. And I was thinking about that as I was listening to Ron Todd. It's not like Ron Todd, Ed Miliband this week. And I'll tell you what I remember when Ed Miliband was talking about patriotism and Labour was Ron Todd's funeral memorial service took place in Dagenham Redbridge Football Club in the middle of my constituency in 2005, I guess 2005. Yeah. And Ron, as a veteran, we had the Dagenham Royal British Legion, we had the Royal Marines, we had the Royal Naval Association give this guard of honour, right, as his coffin was brought into. It was an extraordinarily powerful thing. And there was this, Jack Jones gave this, the great union leader, Jack Jones gave this extraordinary speech there, Tony Benn was there, Gordon Brown. It was a real Labour movement thing. But the generational thing you couldn't lose, where many of those people who had put uniforms on, Jack Jones had been in the 30s in the International Brigade in Spain, you know, there was that strong relationship between patriotism, what a country could be, socialism, and a real extraordinary humanity, which never lost. I remember it wasn't just that he spoke of and understood and was embedded in the working class. We also honoured him. I remember we have a street, I was around there the other week actually, with a street called Ron Todd Close in Dagenham, actually. It's not far from George Lansbury Street, actually. You know, it's very interesting how these great pioneers of Labour actually honoured by their own communities because they didn't disappear away from them when they had the chance. He used to live around the corner from the football club until he died of leukemia in 1970. Sorry, at 78 I think he was when he died. Was 78? He must have been late 70s, yeah. And what would happen, because I was his MP, you see, so what would happen, he would ring up, he'd leave messages, he'd ring my office all the time, and it usually consisted of him going around to get his paper in the morning and meeting someone, and it was in Reed Road, I remember this news agency used to go, and he'd talk to anyone, right, and he'd find out what's going on and what problems they have, and then he'd ring me, and he'd go, look, I found it, and it was literally all the time, he would be sending in these messages to me, or telling me what, giving me orders, explaining it. I remember there was Jack Jones was there as well when we launched Ron Todd Close in Dagenham, and Lenny McCluskey, who's now the General Secretary of Unite, was there, a council leader. And what it is, because why he reminded me of George Lansbury so much was because the hallmark of it was his total honesty and integrity. And it spoke of a working class that is often not talked about much anymore, actually, in this language of celebrity and, you know, the X Factor and all that. We sort of wife swap and all that. It was very different to the class that he understood, talked about. And he was also a member of our retired members T&G branch, and after every meeting he'd always be on the phone to me then saying, look, you've got to get this kitchen sorted out for him, or this group. The point about it is he was the friend of Nelson Mandela, the massive, powerful trade union leader who commanded that political stage, but to him it was about your neighbour. That's what it was all about. It was all about, I tell you, Dylan Thomas once had a phrase about the Labour movement. He said, the Labour movement at its best is magical and parochial. Magical and parochial. It's embedded in the everyday culture, represents it, understands it, and honours it, respects it. And that's what he was like. He was murder, actually, to be the MP for, because he would be on me all the time about planning issues, about a neighbour problem, about a garden, about something or other, you know, kids' education. And he couldn't leave it alone. He had to take it up. There was some, because he thought everyone should have a fair cut at it, just like you was talking about like everyone has a. It's about the dignity of the human being actually, and no one was irretrievable. Everyone deserved it, and his granddaughter was walking the same streets, making sure that everyone did have a fair go at it, even those that society wrote off. So I was a massive fan of Ron Todd. I was extraordinarily privileged. I was just thinking about this today when I was making some notes about this. I was extraordinarily privileged to be at his last ever public speech. And there was about a third of the amount of people there than there are here tonight. It was in Dagenham Labour Hall in Tenterton Road. It was in 2005. At the time, we had the BNP all over our streets. Right? It was really, really bumpy. Really bumpy. And we had a meeting in our Labour Hall to talk about what we were going to do, because what became the first ever BNP councillor in London after Derek Beacon had got elected on the Isle of Dogs 15 years before he lost. And then there was a BNP, the first ever London BNP councillor got elected in Goresbrook in Barking. And we had a meeting to campaign and organise against it. And Ron gave his last ever speech there, and there must have been about 15 in this room. And I can still see it there. He would stand up and he was shaking with anger and the urgency of the situation. He knew he was dying. But he had such passion about what had to happen. He was shaking as he forced us on that night because he thought that, and he talked about the perils of fascism, his own experience, how the far right had scavenged around working class communities, pitched one group against another, and it was born of a passion and a belief of that human condition and what people could be that he urged us on that night. He had this energy and vitality even when he was dying about what our country could be and what we had to fight literally on the streets. A principled, honest patriot. I would sit and visit him many, many times in his house, and I would just have to listen because he would go on and on and on. He could literally talk for Britain. And it was about his politics, his country, his experiences, his international experiences. He would show me his many collections. He was an avid collector of all sorts of things. He would send me his poetry, which is very good. He would send me, even though he was described as a dinosaur, he was very knowledgeable about fossils. Right? And he would send me, because he knew my son was very interested, all boys were interested in dinosaurs, he would send me books and fossils for my boy. He was extraordinarily kind. And he hated New Labour. Hated it. And I was to him a representative of New Labour. But it was never about malice. It was all about loss of what he thought a party could be. It was out of sadness rather than anger, personal anger. As he said, he was brought up in a family of market traders in Walthamstow. I never knew that he actually served in the Marines with his father. So I didn't know that. They were on the same camp at one stage, which I only sort of learnt about the other day. There was Geoffrey Goodman, who wrote his actual, obituary in The Guardian, who was the industrial correspondent of the Mirror, who actually was much more than that, actually. He was best friends with Anara and Bevan. He was an extraordinary, and he is, he's 94 still, Geoffrey. And because I was coming up here, I thought I'd go to Bevan. He's a mate of mine. And he talked to me about Ron the other day for a cup of coffee. And he told me this amazing story about when Ron was in the Dagenham car plant, which he was until 62, where he became a full-time official of the union. There was always a story about his personal integrity, whereby his older brother worked on the same site and it was higher up in the union. And he said, look, to make some more money, why don't you do more shift work at night and then you can wing it on a couple of shifts? Bob's your uncle. And he got very angry, had a real row with his brother because he would refuse to do that. Such was his level of personal integrity that he would have nothing of swinging the lead or playing the game. And I thought that was quite revealing, because the other thing that you mentioned was when he became the leader of the TNG, there was George Wright, who was his opponent from the Welsh regional secretary. It was a right-left thing. Ron was always at the left in the Labour Party. And they said they'd ring the ballot. And Moss Evans, who took over from, advised him to carry on and just fight through it. You know, don't have another ballot. But Ron refused that and forced the union into another ballot, which we came out with 75,000, I think, vote majority rather than 40,000. It was total vindication of what he said, but it demonstrates the actual story that stands out the most in terms of his personal integrity and his pioneering mindset actually was he broke the rules of the union once. And I think people don't quite realise this. That Geoffrey was telling me, when Bill Morris, who was his deputy, when Ron was going to retire, the F&GP, the very powerful committee of the union, which would nominate who would be the candidates, said that Bill couldn't stand, basically because he was black. And Ron refused to accept it. He refused to accept that, and he forced the F&GP against the rules of the union, because he said we cannot have any trouble with this, just on the principle of it, right? In the end, the union ended up with electing the most powerful black man in Britain in terms of the union. So again, testimony to his extraordinary personal integrity, resilience, and the principles of the man were frightening actually, because it was actually described, and talking to Geoffrey, it was said, the trouble with Ron is that he is too bloody honest, was a phrase that was used so many times about him, both in the union, the broader Labour Party, and the trade union movement. And I think it's difficult that to be totally incorruptible, and it being criticism of you, that you're too bloody honest, says a little more about the society than it does about the individual characteristics of the man. There was one historic moment in the trade union labour movement, was from Eric Hammond, who ran the engineering union. Electricians union, sorry, electricians union, it was electricians union, and after he had a big row with the T&G in East London around Wapping, but before that he castigated the miners and he accused them as being lions led by donkeys, was his phrase. And I think many people in this room might well remember when Ron jumps up onto the podium straight after and he said, I prefer to be a donkey than a jackal, Eric. And it's just an extraordinary moment, right, that went right through, put like jump leads across the whole, because it cut through what's that question of integrity across the labour and trade union movement at its best. But it did demonstrate his total incorruptibility. But probably the greatest row he had, and is remembered for, is a row in 1988 with Neil Kinnock, whereby Kinnock in 1987 we lost 3 in a row against Margaret Thatcher. And so we started what we called the modernisation of the Labour Party, which is basically moving it into the centre ground, trying to cut off some of the more traditional class basis of what the Labour Party was. And there was a very famous Tribune rally at the 1988 conference where Ron made a speech just after Kinnock, which was castigating about this modernisation. Castigating. It was primarily about unilateral nuclear disarmament, actually, because that was the one thing, because of Frank Cousins, who had been running the union before, was the one thing that he would never trade off. He was a great pacifist, patriot, unilateralist, and he never saw any distinction between the three. They were all part of the same thing, which is very interesting because it was quite a muscular form of patriotism where you take it on and say the country could be better than to have nuclear weapons around. Anyway, he made this speech at the 1988 Tribune round. The night, I think it was the night that Kinnock made his speech, and there was a terrible fallout where Ron was running around saying that the Labour Party was just led by people in expensive suits running around with filofaxes in their hands, right? It was going too far. And it was very interesting that Manchester this week, Ed Miliband is now sort of trying to unpack that and say the Labour Party has cut itself even too far away and we need more working class representatives in the Labour Party. So we've sort of gone full circle. And it's strange that some of these unfashionable things that Ron Todd stood for are strangely fashionable again now. Like, is spending £100 billion on a tried nuclear weapons system a rational thing given the austerity and retrenchment, just like he was talking about earlier on. So I always find it, actually there's a real case for rehabilitating Ron Todd for the Labour Party now, because he seems very contemporary to me, and not a dinosaur, even though he was a paleontologist. You know, he was, is that the right word, paleontologist? Anyway, he was an extraordinary figure. He intimidated me, Ron Todd. Being his MP was very difficult, actually, because he was forever chasing him, and he was tireless, and he was unscrutable, principled, total integrity, but he would talk and listen, and he would offer advice to anyone. So, with Kinnock, it wasn't personal. It was never personal. It was just about that sense of loss about what the party could be, and that sense of drift and decline away from what he thought the Labour Party should be, who it should be for. The little guy, the person who picks up the bill, you know, the guy who plays by the rules and gets drop kicked, you know, thought that everyone should have a fair crack at it. I always said, there was a great writer who said, the task is to give the ordinary its beautiful day. And Ron Todd, because he was so embedded in the working class and understood it and was respected by it, he could speak about the ordinary things of the world. And he would be unbending in his principled commitment to things, often the most unfashionable of things, but he just thought he was right, because there he was brought up. And I think all politicians got a lot to learn about it. And to me, it goes back to what Labour could be. So, Labour at its best is a patriotic party that looks after everyone. It is literally a one-nation party. So, its most important day for me, for Labour, was in 1940 when Clement Attlee and Greenwood joined the wartime coalition supporting Churchill against those in his own party that wanted to sue for peace with the fascists. Actually, it was about building a new Jerusalem in 45 with Clement Attlee. And that's, whilst actually I think in 45 Ron had started his trip to China and Japan. And some of the things he saw there, I think, were left an indelible mark on it. So when I think about it, I just think about Dylan Thomas, that is, at its best, it is magical and parochial. One fine thing, there's a great philosopher called Raymond Williams who said, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. To make hope possible rather than despair convincing. Ron was absolutely electrifying when speaking on behalf of the normal Joe. And he could make hope possible rather than despair convincing. And we need a lot more of him today, given what this country's going to experience over the next few years. So it's a big credit, it's a real privilege to speak about Ron Todd, because he is a hero of mine. He's strangely contemporary, fashionable with my man, and all power to you, both the Todd family, to keep it alive. There was a great railway leader in Australia called Ben Chifley, and he said, Labour is the light on the hill. The light on the hill. And it was all about hope, and Len could talk about, Ron could talk about Labour as a light on the hill. They can't do today, and that's why despair is convincing and hope is not as possible as it should be. So thanks very much. It's great to be talking about Ron. I think we should speak more about him because he crystallises a tradition of Labour that is often exiled, but has to be brought back centre stage. So thanks, Tony. Thanks very much.
Our last speaker to finish off needs very little introduction, which is the reason we're all here. John mentioned the first time that he met Bianca. I could do the same and said that I don't think in many a year I've been so excited to meet somebody not that was just young and vibrant, but somebody that was willing to roll their sleeves up, get their hands dirty and take the fight, the good fight, to out onto the streets to rescue those who needed rescue, and to make sure that young people had a voice, young people had a future. Bianca, you do your grandfather great honours, absolutely. We're here in his memory, and it's fitting that you should finish off tonight's memorial lecture. So, Bianca Todd.
There were 1.6 million children in poverty. 24,000 children in Northampton in poverty. This winter, 2,700 people will die because of the cold. We imprisoned a squatter for 12 weeks when there are 400,000 homeless people at any one time. We talk about punishing those who were involved in the riots instead of focusing on the cause of the riots, and we're going to be paying police commissioners £100,000 each. 89,000 children are looked after by our services and most likely to end up in prison. We allowed ATOS to sponsor the Paralympics while disabled people died. I'd like to think that these are the things that my grandfather would have been speaking about had he been here this evening. But more than that, I would like to think that these are the things that my grandfather would have done something about. He would have been bemused, which is quite lucky because that's the title of this poem I'm now going to read. Are mankind's values low? Daily Mirror ponders to our whim, devoting half a page. To boast the newsboys gave, the first 4 racing winners. Then we read below in one obscure and lonely paragraph of famines, deaths, as babies die unmourned by we poor sinners. Within our walls, our senses reel from jingled, constant pleas to purchase goods that range from antique furniture to socks, while we in turn are so obsessed that no one ever sees family conversation smothered by the magic of the box. So it was when I was sitting in a cafe last August with who I was now my steering group, John, Tony and some of the others, and we were engaging in what I like to call social commentary. We were talking about the fact that the youth service is no more, that I walk down Abberton Street and I walk past the same homeless man all of the time, and I walk past the same man asking for food all of the time. And we realised that what we'd become was social commentators, and actually, what was that all about? What were we doing? And it gave us a great opportunity to do something, to be something, and that's why Community Courtyard was born. We wanted to create an organisation that is passionate about working with those who feel that society has failed them to create a fairer and safer society. And fundamentally, we do 3 projects, which I wanted to talk to you about tonight, because I won't get another chance, and I want people to know what we do. The first thing that we do is guerrilla gardening, and it will shock you not, but my granny wrote a poem as well that will work well with this. The statistics reveal that while gun crimes are increasing, gun-related deaths are down, and he wrote these 4 lines. The bad news is that gun crimes are high. The good news is gun deaths are down. A comforting thought, we're not going to die. Bad marksmanship spreading across town. That's quite true, I think, some of the young people I work with. John Credits is quite right. I was working in Artsgate in Dagenham where there was quite a lot of crime, particularly on subways where we were working. And I remember sitting in a room with my dad and police authority and lots of different, very important people. And they said, you know, we need to decrease youth crime. And I said, okay, we will. And we chose a number and then we did it. And then when I came out and walked around with John, he was expecting there to be chaos because on his estate there was 2 young people who were the youngest children in England to get ASBOs. And they were causing chaos, they were running riots. But we stopped it. And that wasn't too hard because you just had to give young people things to do. And you had to be there and you had to do other stuff. But the problem that we then had was that young people were like, Bianca, you've stopped us committing crime, but they still think I'm an arsonist and they still think I'm a burglar, so we still can't get into the co-op, so this is doing me no favour. I might as well go back to my old ways. And what we devised was this thing where we go out late at night, because that's when young people go out. So sadly for me, it's about 11 o'clock at night, you're driving to Dagenham from Northampton, dead happy like John is driving home from here, thinking, God, is the traffic on the M25 ever going to move? And you do something that's unusual. You plant plants. You leave pot plants outside people's houses. You say, thank you for being a good neighbour. You say, sorry, but I actually broke into your house last year and burgled you. And then you leave it. You don't need to hand it in face to face. You don't need to do anything else. You just need to do the act. And then the next day, when people wake up, there's a pot plant. Now, I don't know about you, but that cheered me up when I wake up in the morning. Plant outside the house, quite a nice thought. And it works. So suddenly, John, who was a horrific burglar, was seen watering some of the plants in Marksgate, and suddenly it can't be that bad. I mean, I've heard that it bugs old ladies, but look, he looks after plants. Do you mean, so he can't be that bad. So people spoke to him. They treated him as a normal human being. He became part of the community. So what we found was not only was we able to reduce crime in particular areas, we were able to sustain it, because you have to build relationships. And there's only 2 things that I can do with older people and younger people. I can either get young people to give old people pets. It sounds great, but it's going to get messy, so I abandoned that idea. And the next part is about plants. We've done this all across the country now, and most in Northampton we do spring boroughs, we've done new life buildings, we're doing other areas, because it's just a lovely way of young people showing their community pride, showing they're actually able to repair the damage that they did in the riots, showing that they're able to actually be a part of their community. The second project that we're quite passionate about our Urban Zone project. And for those of you who are internet-wise, you'll know about Facebook and Twitter. On Twitter, if you look at Chilled World Recordings, which is our record label, in the top 80 of the alternative pop chart, 70 are Chilled World albums. We don't know whether that's ever been done before. We're going to guess it isn't, because we like to set records, we like to do things first. Why is that? Because the music that young people listen to, the music that we do, is about street. You can all remember the words of songs that you heard 20 years ago, even if you heard the instrumental. We believe that words can change people's lives, and music can bring the world together. When I was a social worker years ago, and I won't say that word outside of the church for fear of being stabbed or chased away, I used to know that placements would break down at about 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And normally what happened was that young person would be placed in an emergency placement, which would be the wrong place, but they were safe, and that was all that mattered. And then the next Friday afternoon, their placement would break down at about 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and so the cycle goes. And the idea of the Urban Zone is that we provide those young people with somewhere safe so their social workers can find them the right place to be. And while they're doing that, we do their life story work. So then when they go to their new placement, rather than being seen as this boy or girl who keeps breaking down placements, keeps causing chaos, we're actually quite a clever young person who made this track, and wouldn't you like to listen to it? Suddenly they're a child who's got actual potential, who's got talent, who they can see the benefits for. When we did this in Thurrock for 2 years, we had a reduction of placement breakdowns by 74%, which is a significant amount of reduction. But more than that, it saves people money and then can put into other services. You heard briefly tonight about our Hoodies for Goodies campaign. If you said to me this time last year, Bianca, you're going to meet 4 young men who won't know each other, they want to do a boxing event, and you'll end up all wearing hooded tops, I'm not sure I would have believed you. But the 4 young men were quite inspiring. All of them had come from disadvantaged backgrounds, who had struggled their way to university because they understood that the only way that they could change their lives was through education. That an educated man is more dangerous than a man with a weapon. That inspired me to say, yes, I'll give it a go. So on the 1st of November, as Bob and Bobby have already mentioned, we're having National Hoodies for Goodies Day. There's not many of you here, but I'm sure that you can all share your friends around it and talk about it. The idea of it is quite simple. This is not about where children in need, where we get the rich people on telly telling us to give us, poor people, we've got to give our own money so that we make it back to help us in our own deprived communities. We could have done that ourselves. It's actually where we all just give a pound, where we all help each other. If we got every school in Northampton, there's 236 schools in Northampton, to do that, can you imagine the amount of money that we would have raised? When it happened in Africa, when children were dying, we did something about it. We were not social commentators. It is shame on us that we have 24,000 people in Northampton that are in poverty. It is shame on us that we have 1.6 million children in the UK living in poverty. I'm glad to say that my understanding from Heidi Alexander MP that on 17th of October, lots of Labour MPs, and I'm sure that John will be there too, are going to be having their photo taken with a hoodie on, showing the way back to the campaign, giving their pound. We would ask everybody to be talking about Hoodies for Goodies campaign, wanting to make a social change, doing something for those young people, because we know that education is the only way out. I am particularly lucky to be speaking on the same platform as our national champions and our young ambassador, as it is a real honour for me this evening. I have been inspired by the words as I knew that I would. They have spoken about the man that Ron Todd, my grandfather, was, and the qualities that history has recognised as being unique and important. I am lucky because not only did my granddad inspire me to become a member of the trade union and to follow social values that now allowed me to be a Labour Party member again, he imparted into my soul a passion to be more than a social commentator, but to work relationally with those who find themselves socially excluded to create social change. I hope that whilst people have to do it. Maybe they're so used to people letting them down that they all signed up and they thought, well, I'll sign up because it sounds like a good idea, but she won't do it, it's too cold, the night's too long. Does she think she can get Bobby Cummins? Does she think she can get the CND? John Crowlers? Some random lad who they don't know, does she think she can do that? No, I don't think she can. But we don't want to say that to her because they're used to that. So what people have learned tonight is two things, I hope, that when Community Courts Yard says we're going to do something, we're going to do it. We're going to be the leading youth work provider in the East Midlands. We're going to make a significant difference to those people who find themselves in prison. We're going to be supporting those who find themselves socially excluded. And we're going to do it by being co-creative, by working from the ground up. I wanted to end my speech quite quickly because A, I'm quite cold, and B, I'm now a little bit hungry. But with a poem that my grandfather wrote in 2004, but I thought kind of was quite apt, considering the kind of political conversations that have gone on this evening. It's called A Plea to All Millionaires. Stop counting the millions you have in your banks. All band together and just relinquish 1/10. Establish a trust fund and gather the thanks of children all waiting at length for assistance that none of you really will miss, to ease all the misery that now can be cured. Accept lack of finances, deprive them of this, leaving them problems that must be endured. Your reward for this gesture won't go amiss. You'll see little children so happy and healthy. So in ending this plea, I promise you this, you will be so proud and you will still be quite wealthy. It would be great if all that you did from tonight is share what you learned with somebody else. We could have a national campaign that was started in the heart of Northampton that spreads across England and makes a difference. We could be the change now. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I look forward to seeing you this time next year. And I thank my lovely companions on stage here for a wonderful